Okay, good morning. It is the 30th, believe it or not, of October. We have our work session today. We have pretty much every work session day. We have multiple work sessions scheduled. So we'll try to be efficient with our questions and discussion. Welcome. Or on the IBR program update. Many of us may have questions or not. In any case, we'll invite you to come forward and make yourself comfortable and begin the presentation.
Thank you, Chair Medvigi and members of the Clark County Council. For the record, I'm Frank Green. I am an assistant program administrator on the IBR program. I do work for WSDOT, but I represent all of the partners on this bi-state program. Happy to come and have a conversation today about our draft supplemental environmental impact statement and the work that's been done and documented in that. And so if you can go to the next slide, please. I just want to kind of remind everyone that this program's, I think, been in discussion for quite some time. It started in the late 90s with a series of studies. Did some work when it was called the Columbia River Crossing, did get to a federal record of decision. There was a pause and it was brought back by our two governors in 2019 and named the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. And so through a lot of this, there's been discussion that we want to maximize use of some of that work from the past, which is why we are doing a supplemental environmental impact statement. We really want to build on some of that previous work. We got confirmation from our federal partners as we restarted this program that we could move forward with the supplemental, building on the past record of decision that was received in 2011. Next slide, please. So reminder of kind of the key purpose and need elements that the program is trying to look to address with any of our proposed alternatives. We have 6 kind of core members or pieces of that purpose and need. Safety with the accidents and crashes that we see, really largely due to some of the kind of geometry of the freeway, the narrow lanes, no shoulders, close proximity of several interchanges that are highly used within this 5-mile corridor leads to high accident locations on the facility. We also see congestion. The bridge itself kind of acts as what we'd call kind of a meter because of the narrow lanes, no shoulders. It causes traffic to congest at the bridge itself. That congestion impacts freight and mobility of freight. There's 2 key kind of interchanges here within this 5-mile corridor that are main freight access points to I-5. We see over 10% of the traffic that uses this bridge is freight. So we know this is a very important economic link between not only Vancouver and Portland, but the states of Washington and for our country. We know that there is a desire for transit, but right now the only transit that's crossing this bridge is a good service that C-Tran provides with Express Bus, but it is subjected to the congestion that we see, or if there's an accident, like I said, with the high accident location, or even a bridge lift, it does limit its ability to operate. We know that the active transportation network isn't necessarily enticing for people to want to use. You've got about a 4.5 foot wide sidewalk that's a foot from I-5. And so not a lot of people really choose to use that, even with the improvement in technology for like scooters and electric bikes. We want to see if we can improve that. And then we know there's potential vulnerability to a seismic event. One bridge is 107 years old, and there's soil that in an earthquake could liquefy and cause catastrophic damage potentially to the bridge. So with those key pieces of the purpose and need, if you can go to the next slide, please. We came back together when the program kind of restarted in 2019, and we looked at what had been done through the analysis of the CRC work and got to what is we refer to as a modified locally preferred alternative. That modified locally preferred alternative, or MLPA, as I might refer to it at one point or another, we have a lot of acronyms, includes replacement of the existing bridge, with a new seismically resilient structure that will have the 3 through lanes that today does, but also at least 1 auxiliary lane. It'll have shoulders that are capable of, handling some of the bus on shoulder to help with some of that express bus, as I mentioned, that currently does get potentially congested, but also a safety shoulder on both sides in case of a breakdown of a vehicle, so they're not broke down in the lane like they are today. We are also proposing improvements to the active transportation or the bike pedestrian facilities, as well as an extension of light rail from the current expo station to downtown Vancouver. Now, within that alternative, we will compare that in this document. So you'll see a few slides here that really compare the build alternative to what we call the no build alternative. So what if we don't build these improvements, trying to model both effects and forecast them to the 2045 timeframe with this document. There are several design options, and I'll touch upon a few of them that are within those alternatives. So what does the configuration of the bridge look like? As I said, we're proposing a replacement bridge, but it could be a stacked bridge. It could be a single level bridge. And I have a graphic here that'll kind of walk through what some of the differences of that are. So next slide. So this picture kind of illustrates the existing bridge configuration. So as you can see, there's 3 through lanes in each direction. The lane widths, aren't really what we'd want to put for a standard highway lane width, and we have no shoulders. So you can see the picture on the right is the older of the 2 bridges. It's the northbound bridge. That's the bridge that was built in 1917. And it's even a little bit narrower than the newer bridge, which was built in the 50s. And so if you can think about this bridge, one of the things I like to correlate, if you've driven across this bridge versus driven across I-205, there's a different level of white knuckle, I think I've heard some people say, when they drive across this bridge, because it is constraining. There's no shoulders, and the 205 bridge is more akin to what we're proposing. So if you go to the next slide. One of the things I should mention, obviously, with the existing bridge is it does have the lift span, which on average could lift about 300 times a year. So that's not quite once a day, and that fluctuates through time. So 10 years ago, we were saying it was over 400 times a year. It really fluctuates with the water levels that we're seeing. But whenever that lifts, it's a stoplight on the freeway, and we see accidents during that time or crashes increase. So this image kind of shows and depicts what we would call a single level bridge. There's several different bridge types that could be built with a single level bridge, but as you can see on this graphic, you see the full shoulders on both sides of the freeway. You see what's depicted with the dark blue is the 3 through lanes. The light blue is what we call an auxiliary lane. That is a lane that would be allowing to help for some of that merging and weaving of those closely spaced interchanges that are within the corridor. You also see some width here for transit and some width for active transportation. So they're all on the same level. That's why we call it a single level. Profile wise, they're at the same kind of level. And you can see on the right some different bridge types that might be available. A bridge type that's very similar to like the Glenn Jackson 205 bridge, which we call a girder bridge. Or this might even open up the ability to do something that has a little bit thinner of a bridge deck, which could help us a little bit with river navigation. So next slide, please. So the one thing we're also studying as part of this draft SEIS, one of the configurations is a single level, but also studying the effects of what would putting a movable span be back within the program. So previous was a fixed, which means we wouldn't have a movable span. This alternative or this graphic depicts you'd still see all the modes on one level, very similar to what the last graphic was. So you see the roadways, the shoulders, the active transportation and transit share the same level, but they would just be, in this case, between the lift span towers. Next slide. And I thought there was, we must have missed one. There's also another configuration called a double level, a stacked bridge that has the The highway kind of on the top level, this is very similar to where CRC ended, the highway on this top level and the active transportation or the bike, the light rail on the lower level. So that's a bridge that would be a lot thicker and therefore need to go a little bit higher profile wise for the freeway. So one of the questions we want to make sure to address is what's going on with the funding and where are we at with obtaining the sources to be able to pay for construction. You can see on this graphic here that the project did a cost estimate. The type of cost estimate we did is we refer to it as a risk-based cost estimate. So we try to identify any cost or schedule risks that a program like this could encounter as you're developing the project, constructing the project. And so that's why you see a range. So the range represents the different probabilities with risk and schedule that we were able to model and anticipate. We showed that the range is somewhere between 5 and 7.5 billion. 5 billion is, if you really think about it from risk perspective, if we don't really encounter any of the risks we identified and we're able to really meet a schedule that has no hiccups. So it's like a 10% probability of that being the estimate, whereas the 7.5 billion kind of goes the other way and it assumes the other bookend of we have a lot of schedule risks that we encounter a lot of cost risks. For a program like this, the DOTs typically budget toward the 60% probability, and so that's why, if you've heard in the past, we're targeting 6 billion as the proposed funding for the program. That's the 60th percentile with this risk based estimate. So the pie chart on the right kind of demonstrates where we're anticipating getting the funding that we're reaching out for. So both states so far have dedicated about 1.1 billion of funding. The Washington legislature with Move Ahead Washington in 2022 and the Oregon legislature in 2023. Both legislatures have authorized tolling as a potential funding source for this program. And then we've really used that kind of state funding and commitment to leverage several big federal grants. We received $600 million in what's called a mega grant that was part of the IIJA package that Congress had passed. We received that award last December, so we're working actively with our federal partners to get a grant agreement in place for that. And just a few months ago, we were awarded $1.5 billion from the Bridge Investment Program grant. Now, the program, if you do the math here, the program submitted in those grant applications for maybe a little bit more than we had originally anticipated, assuming that, the awards sometimes don't match with the full ask that you get, but we were able to secure the full ask for both of those grants. There is still one grant that we're pursuing. It's a transit capital investment grant. That's a much different process. It's a stepped process. Rather than submitting an application and getting award, you get accepted into their process, which is a several-year process. We were accepted into the first of 4 phases of that process last September, and we'll continue to work with FTA to target about $1 billion out of that grant package. So next slide. I know this council has provided several opinions in the past about tolling within the I-205, I-5 Oregon corridor. I want to put it out there that we for this program with the tolling on the I-5 bridge are working very closely with the 2 transportation commissions. The Washington and Oregon Transportation Commission will jointly work together to set any rates or toll policy for this bridge. The intent of tolling on this bridge is to fund the capital construction for it. So there's a MOU between the 2 councils that has set up a subcommittee. So that tolling subcommittee meets, tries to meet monthly. Some months, if there's a holiday, they may not be able to. But they're meeting monthly to try to identify scenarios that will be studied from a tolling perspective and to identify some of the policies that will be put into that in early October. So we're still in October. I know Chair said it's October 30th already, but at the very beginning of this month, both full commissions came together to adopt some scenarios for study with regards to tolling. There's 4 scenarios to advance to study for tolling. Next slide. So a little bit about what's in the document. Kind of like I said, one of there'll be a lot of kind of factual or data information thrown here. But NEPA is the process that identifies that we're doing an environmental impact statement right now. As I mentioned previously, we're doing a supplemental to build on the work that had been done during CRC. You can see all the different pieces of what the NEPA document will assess. It'll look for and disclose any potential impacts that a construction of a program may have, but also benefits that are proposed with those investments. So they range environment, history, culture, community, and like we said, just kind of construction. So next slide. So this gives a kind of a highlight of how the document is broken down. So there's a lot of transportation measurements and analysis. I don't have a slide for every one of these bullets. I tried to pull some of the highlight ones, but it's a fairly inclusive document. So I'll go over a few of the transportation highlights today. I'll go over some of the community and a few of the environmental. But all of this is available in our document if you or your constituents are interested in diving into it more. So next slide. So just a couple highlights of the transportation finding. As I mentioned, this program does have a lot of accidents and crashes because of the geometry and the close proximity of some of the interchanges. And so what we've seen with the build options in general is that we do see a reduction and expect a reduction in crashes, so an improvement to safety. We are able to really accommodate moving more people through the corridor and providing an increased access to public transit for those who may choose to use that. We're also providing safer, just generally safer crossings and abilities for people to get through this corridor using any mode. We do see a decrease in travel time, which would result in better access for people here in Clark County and in North Portland to jobs that are maybe on the other side of the river. So next slide. Little bit about the crashes. We know with a no build, we would expect the crashes to increase, up to about 28% because there'll be more people trying to use the facility. And with more people trying to use the facility, we would expect to see some potential additional crashes that are going on with those reasons I mentioned before. And we've seen that with our improvements and the investments we're making, we do see a 13 to 17% reduction in those crashes with the models and forecasts that we use. We work with Metro in Portland and RTC here in Vancouver to do a lot of this forecasting and modeling based on projected future plans. So next slide. I mentioned that the program is able to show, and there's a lot going on this slide, but we're able to demonstrate that we can move more people through this corridor, and with some of the investments and proposed investments that we're making, it doesn't necessarily result in more vehicle miles traveled. So we're providing other options and other choices. You see this broken into kind of four kind of key activities that how people will be moving through the corridor. So as I mentioned, this is people, not necessarily number of vehicles, but we have vehicles, freight, transit, and active transportation. So you can see how the no build on the left compares to the build on the right with the kind of the yellow number. As I mentioned, we do show an increase in people throughput with a substantial amount more using active transportation and transit, but also still showing that vehicles and freight are able to move through here. And when you combine that with the next slide, if we can go to the next slide or the next couple of slides, we kind of show today there's about 143,000 people crossing. We expect that number to increase by about 26% by 2045. These are showing numbers out to 2045 with modeling that, like I said, uses kind of the regional growth plans. And with the build options, we actually show a little bit less in their cars. So this is showing vehicles using like automobiles because we do have potential other choices for people to use. Next slide. One of the things we get asked about is travel time and congestion. So I'll have a few slides to talk about those. For this slide, when you see the times that are identified here, I want to make sure it's known we had to pick one certain trip to demonstrate what the travel time would be. So this is just one example that tries to demonstrate what the travel time savings would be, and it shows a trip that starts at 205 up north, so really where the 205 I-5 split is, and drives down to where the I-405 split is in Portland. So it's about a 12-mile trip. Obviously, if you pick a different origin and destination, the timing might be different. But this is just trying to show an example for both directions of what the proposed investments would mean. And so with the southbound, you see if we did nothing, it would take about almost an hour for that 12-mile trip in the 2045 timeframe in the AM peak. You do see a reduction in time with the build options. Now, one of the questions we get asked is, well, it doesn't, it looks like it's 4 or 8 minutes, but there is some downstream congestion that, is outside of the 5-mile project limits here that you can see coming into those numbers within the document and how it's analyzed. If you flip around and look at northbound, the bridge is really one of the main kind of constraint points for the freeway. There are a lot of people trying to get on right near the bridge, but you can see in the build options that the reduction in travel times are quite a bit higher than in the southbound. So if you I like to look at this, if you add this all up, if you're doing a round trip in a day with the no build, you're at about 100 minutes of your day travel time wise. In the build options, you're somewhere between 64 and 80 minutes. So you see, at least a 20% reduction in travel time for this example for this trip. Next slide. And what does that mean for hours of congestion? We see a lot of hours of congestion out there on the freeway today. In the no build option, we're pretty much showing that southbound and northbound would be congested throughout the day. The bridge acts very similar to what we see as ramp meters out here. And you'd see congestion at the bridge pretty much the majority of the day for both northbound and southbound. With a build, you see the southbound reduces quite substantially, and northbound does as well. And so we see a pretty good savings in meeting the purpose and need for congestion. One of the things that is hard to demonstrate on a graphic like this is in the no build, the length of the backup is quite a bit more than in any of the builds. So even though the builds are still showing congestion, instead of it being like a 5 or 8 mile backup, it's more akin to like a 1 or so mile backup. So it's just right at the bridge. It doesn't necessarily back all the way up to 500 in Washington or down to 405 in Oregon. Next slide. So how do the travel times relate to transit? So on the left, we show the 2 express bus options. I mentioned express bus being in the congestion. It shows kind of the travel time with the express bus. Now, one of the interesting things you'll see here is this is showing from downtown Vancouver to downtown Portland, not that 12-mile trip. So it's a little bit different of a trip because it's where the transit would be mostly moving. You see in the no build option on the left that the transit actually has a faster travel times than in the build option. And the cause of that is, as I mentioned, the existing bridge is kind of acting as a ramp meter. So in the no build, because it's not allowing as much traffic to get through as the capacity that's there, you actually see for about a mile south of the existing bridge, traffic flows a little bit better just because the bridge is holding back a lot of the traffic. And since transit in this scenario is starting in downtown, they don't have the backup that's going up to like 500 that the previous graphic with the longer travel times did. So you can see northbound is maybe as you might expect it to be, where the no build is quite a bit longer than the build, but the southbound, you see in the build options, any of that congestion further south might be backing up and causing longer travel times. But you still, if you add the times up, as I mentioned before, the round trips for the build options are less than the round trips for the no build. And then we show on the right, just because it is in its dedicated guideway, the approximate time to go from downtown Portland to downtown Vancouver, or vice versa, downtown Vancouver to downtown Portland on light rail, about 47 minutes with the build option. Next slide. And I didn't really address this before, but if you remember that person throughput slide with the data, what we do see is that we see almost a 100% increase in transit ridership with the addition of the extension of light rail. And what that really ultimately means is we see more passenger miles on transit, almost tripling from today. So today, people may use express bus where they can get on up like at 99th Street and go to downtown Portland. With that light rail being extended, there's access for people that would desire to maybe go a little bit more throughout the Vancouver Portland Metro region. So with our modeling, we do see more passenger mile trips with the investments as well. Next slide. One of the things we know, kind of shifting gears from transportation, going a little bit more to community, is navigation on the Columbia River. We know that construction of this bridge will need a Coast Guard permit. It'll need approvals of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. A new bridge will have fewer in-water piers. We'll be able to actually work with the Army Corps to kind of designate where those new channels are and safely design the piers with navigation in mind. And so if you can go to the next slide, it kind of depicts a little bit of the what we're looking at from trying to get to a fixed versus a movable span. So the upper graphic shows the profiles. We are trying to get to 116 feet of vertical clearance with a fixed bridge. Those top two kind of lines, there's a dark blue line that shows, as I mentioned, kind of the stacked bridge. So if you see the very, very top blue line, there's a dark blue line below it that it would show the bottom being at 116 feet. Kind of depicts what I said with the stacked bridge. The highway actually has a higher profile than it would on a single level. The single level's designated with the kind of the aqua dotted line there, turquoise dotted line. I'm not sure what color that specifically is. Cyan. I'm not a color expert, but it shows all levels on one, at all the modes on one level. So it shows just a little bit of a difference in the profiles. With a movable bridge that we're studying, you see the fixed clearance, or the when it's down clearance, is a little bit lower because we do need a flat section to lift. We can't really have a vertical curve in the lift portion. So you can see that's why that kind of, I guess it's purple or magenta line flattens a little bit and provides a little bit less clearance. Now, obviously, we know to be able to get to this decision, we have to work very closely, as I said, with the Army Corps and the Coast Guard, and the potentially any impacted users if we're going to be at 116 instead of where we were at before. We do know in the previous program we were able to get to those agreements. We're in the midst of having those conversations right now, and did get a permit at 116. So it's an effort that the program is going through in close coordination with the Coast Guard. But the bottom graphics here show where the new channels would be. I know we got a lot of questions after the bridge in Baltimore was hit. What do our channels look like, and how do we build a bridge that will be able to, take that into account? So we're very closely coordinating with the U.S. Army Corps about what the channels after we build the bridge will look like. So this kind of just demonstrates we are looking to shift the primary channel. Today it's on the northern part of the river. We're looking to shift it kind of a little bit more to the center where that higher vertical clearance that we're showing would be. So we would also, in the movable span option, if that's ultimately where it goes, we would be building the movable span kind of a channel south of where it is today, to try to line up a little bit better with the BNSF bridge. Next slide. A little bit about some of the community impacts, potential impacts. So acquisitions and displacement, we know trying to maintain I-5 throughout construction means that we're going to have to build the new bridge on one side or the other of the bridge. The existing bridge to be able to maintain I-5 throughout construction. Currently, we're proposing downstream. And so in the document, you can see that the program is potentially impacting up to 47 acres of acquisitions. That equates to potentially 43 residential units, 36 businesses, or one public use site. Now, the other information on this slide are some of those other design options that we're really still working through. We have an option of, do we build the C Street ramp to City Center, or have that traffic go to Mill Plain? Do we shift the freeway somewhat in downtown Vancouver to try to avoid the historic reserve? But if we do that, you can see we potentially impact more of the businesses in downtown Vancouver. We're also analyzing the potential for several park and ride locations in downtown Vancouver to try to connect with the transit. So you see the differences in potential impacts based on some of those options as well. And we'll be looking for, public comments on that with this EIS work. Next slide. The right-of-way process, we get asked a lot about this. It's obviously the first thing we're going to try to do is avoid, if possible, or minimize any impacts to parcels. This document is out there. We need to disclose what all of those potential impacts are, but as we advance design, we would love to avoid, if possible, as many of those impacts as we can. Obviously, as I mentioned, we're building this proposed program, kind of to the side of the existing bridge. So we unfortunately will have some impacts, but there's a very clear process that we'll walk through with any of those potentially impacted owners. That is the uniform relocation and assistance process. So we'll be able to begin that once we complete our environmental work, but we'll continue to advance design, hopefully to be able to avoid some of the impacts that right now at a lower level of design we're not able to avoid, if at all possible. Next slide. Economics. We know one of the key drivers for a program like this, and one of the important pieces of the I-5 corridor here is the economic vitality that it provides, not just our region and state, but really the west coast of the country. And so we do see with, as I mentioned, with some of the transportation parts previously on slides, we see improved freight mobility through the corridor. We see improved safety for freight through the corridor. We do show improved access to jobs, for example, to people within the region. But there are some impacts. As I kind of mentioned, some of those businesses that could be potentially displaced, right now we're showing that they could have about 616 jobs related to them. And so if those businesses are displaced, as we work with them, hopefully those jobs will not go away, but be displaced and be able to still be viable wherever those businesses end up. And as I said, some of the options like the westward shift might have additional business impacts. C Street, I mentioned, is one of those design options that we're analyzing. Should we have the C Street ramp or not? And what we've seen with that, for example, is more traffic using Mill Plain. So businesses along Mill Plain might have some additional impact with the added traffic on Mill Plain. But one of the benefits that the document does disclose is with this program being in construction for 10 plus years, every $1 billion we spend in construction does equate to direct jobs for contractors, designers, and people working on it. But also it brings some of this money into our economy, especially really if you think about those federal funds. Those federal funds wouldn't be coming to this region if it wasn't for using them on this program. So that should be a benefit, with the increased employment and spending within the region. Next slide. So really just want to get the word out there right now. There's a lot more in the draft SEIS that I didn't cover, but there's a lot of ways for the council or any of the constituents for Clark County to review the document if they haven't been able to yet. We are just a little bit over halfway through our 60-day public comment period. You can access the document on our website at interstatebridge.org/draft SEIS. We also have several locations as listed on this slide where people can go and see an actual hard physical copy if they want to read it. You can view our website, our calendar, and if you can go to the next slide. We are really looking for comments in any way, shape, or form. I've said I think we'll accept emails, we'll accept comments on our website. You can come into our office and give us a handwritten. You can mail us. I don't know if anyone really still mails letters all the time with today's technology, but you can mail us comments. We do have one more virtual public hearing. It's tonight at 6 p.m. So we're encouraging, that's an opportunity for members of the public to come and speak directly on a Zoom meeting to the program, and we will write down your comment at that meeting. But as I mentioned, we really do want to get comments from individuals. This process requires that we respond to every comment we get during this public comment period, and so the team will actively be working on that once the public comment period comes to a close on November 18th. But I think next slide might also talk a little bit about the kinds of comments. So, there are some things that working with our federal partners, we've had to make sure people understand is that if they're going to give us any attachments
on West 21st Street toward Columbia.
Any attachments or links, we need them to cite what their comment was referring to in that attachment. We do ask that any comments submitted be transcribed so that we make sure that we're capturing the comment right. But as you can see, if it's directly related to information that was learned in the draft EIS, that would be helpful for us. But we're accepting any and all comments about the program. And I think I might have one or two more slides. Next slide is, next steps. Once we get all those comments, we'll compile them and start to, as I mentioned, respond to them. But we also expect that those comments will be used by the region to make some of those design option decisions that are still outstanding. Bridge configuration. Is there a C Street loop ramp? Are we shifting in Vancouver? Where, if any, are there, park and rides going to be? And so we're going to use those, compile those, use those as a region to make the design option decisions so that we can work to get to a final supplemental EIS next summer and an amended record of decision late next year, so that we can really start to begin constructing elements of this program with some of those federal funds that we've received. So next slide. Here's the information. If folks want to be able to stay connected, if they're not signed up for our newsletter, it shares a lot of information monthly of what we're doing. You can also go on our website because we have a lot of public meetings with our advisory groups, so people can understand when we're going to have those if they want to come and listen or make sure they give public comments. But I believe that's all I had, and I'll try to get through that pretty quickly, Chair. So hopefully there's some time for questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you so much for coming in person to address us. I don't know how many questions council may have. We do have other work sessions, including our budget, which I don't want to rush through anything, nor do I want to rush through yours. So let me just do this in an orderly way, and we'll gauge how many questions there are. Glenn, on behalf of District 1, do you have any questions or comments you would like to make?
Sure. My question would be centered around tolling and overall expense. So, I remember when, I guess it's been 5 years already now. I remember when this first started getting talked about, and I think there were estimates thrown out that are around like 4.5 billion. Now we're at like 6, upwards of 8. And I still think we're going to be surprised when we get ready to build this thing. I don't know of any mega project anywhere near here that hasn't been surprised. Even with the most dedicated planning and attempt to get that number right, it still ends up higher. So my question is, if the project comes in over budget, what gives? Where is that funding going to come from? Is it going to be tacked on to higher tolls to pay it, or will things be cut from the project? How's that going to work?
Thank you. I almost said Commissioner, Counselor Young. Sorry, used to dealing with commissions. It's a good question. One of the things is as I mentioned, we're going to try to make some of those project decisions with our partners, early next year, mid next year, so that we can do a very thorough update of our cost estimate based on our understanding of what the plan is, but also some of the advanced designs we have, so that we can better answer that question that I know we're getting. Where do we think the estimate is? The program team is trying to advance design with the understanding of, kind of what our budget is. We have more committed to this program right now than the program ever has when it was called CRC or any other time. And so we're actively, trying to say, how do we provide the operations that are in this document within that, that budget? And so, yes, we are looking at sequencing this program. There's 26 or 28 proposed construction contracts to build this right now. It's not one big construction contract. So how we sequence those contracts might also affect the ability to stay within that budget. But also as we're able to complete our environmental documents, that's when we'll start going out to construction. And I think like you're kind of identifying, that's when we'll really start knowing, we can do everything we can to estimate it, but when we start seeing the bids come in, how might that affect, future contracts so that we can do our best to stay within the budget? Right now, I would say that, tolls aren't a unlimited amount of funding. We know right now we're targeting in our financial plan between 1.24 and 1.6 billion out of tolls. That was from our previous finance work. So the scenarios that our commissions are looking at kind of look to address those two funding levels. It's not likely that if the program's going to need additional funds, tolls would be like the only source that we'd have to go after. I know Administrator Johnson has mentioned, we'll be looking to see if we do need to any potential federal programs that might still be available or things like that. But right now, the program and the design team on the program are doing everything we can to design within the budget that, is a substantial amount of committed funds for this program until we know more.
Okay, I could ask more questions, but I'll go ahead for the sake of efficiency and let other counselors ask.
Okay, Michelle, why don't we go to you then? Do you have any questions or comments?
I do. I have actually 3 questions, probably because I'm on the transportation committees. My first question is, what is the status of Coast Guard approval? I think that's the $1 million question I've asked, I think 6 months ago when Greg presented to the RTC. What is the status today?
So good question. We are working closely with the Coast Guard. We've resubmitted what's called a navigation impact report with them. They're reviewing it. It addressed several of the parts of the preliminary navigation clearance determination they had previously issued. And as I mentioned, we are working very closely with 3 fabricators and 1 vessel owner to do everything we can to ensure that they can still stay in business here in Clark County and at the place they currently are doing their business, but will allow us to try to get to that 116 fixed bridge. So the goal right now would be to have that comment period on that navigation impact report early next year, so that we'd be trying to get the revised preliminary navigation clearance determination, probably near the middle or I guess the end of the first quarter, probably as we start to get into spring next year. And the conversations with the Coast Guard have been going really well. They know that they know why we're working on this program to try to get to the desire of not having a lift bridge, but they also need to see the work from that we're doing with the potential impacted users. So that's kind of our timeline, is looking to get a revised PNCD spring of next year.
So if they don't approve, then it could impact the construction schedule because construction, you mentioned, is supposed to start in 2025.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I should have clarified that PNCD really lets us get the record of decision that we're trying to get next year. The Coast Guard permit is going to come a little bit later. It would come in probably 2026 because you need a record of decision to be able to get that Coast Guard permit. For the bridge itself, construction, our current construction plan is to be in the river in the in-water window in 2027. When I say things could begin in 2025, it might be some of the not over the river parts of the program, like somewhere up near Evergreen or along SR 14, maybe even down in in Hayden Island, areas that kind of help us set up for what's coming as we build the bridge and some of those approaches. So the Coast Guard permit timeframe right now is 2026.
Okay, thank you. My next question is, with a 3-lane bridge replacing a 3-lane bridge, is the decrease in transportation time, is that being factored by light rail because it's just three lanes replacing 3 lanes?
Well, I think and I'm not our specific transportation engineer, but the way I would couch it is, we will see 4 lanes of width on the bridge. And what that auxiliary lanes allows is for those 3 through lanes to act like 3 through lanes. Today, the three lanes on the bridge really act as 1 to maybe 1.5 actual general purpose or through lanes, and 1 to 1.5 lanes that are where all the traffic is merging and weaving and trying to get to those interchanges. So that auxiliary lane allows the traffic that's merging and weaving between Hayden Island and 14 or Marine Drive and Hayden Island to merge in those auxiliary lanes, which allows the through lanes to act as through lanes like we would want them to. And so that's where a lot of that travel time and transportation benefit comes from.
Okay. And then my last question is, I was looking a couple of weeks ago at the executive steering group committee and noticed that Multnomah and Clark County are not a part of that. Why was that decided? Because it impacts our counties as a whole, and I just see 2 mayors on there and not counties.
Yeah, it's I appreciate that question. I think that the identification of the steering group members were really the jurisdictions within kind of the ownership and maintenance and operation of where this kind of program falls. We know that it doesn't quite extend into Multnomah County jurisdiction or Clark County jurisdiction within the I-5 corridor. And so that's where the 10 partners that are on that ESG group were identified.
Well,
Fully
I don't
recognize that it's within Clark County and Multnomah County though, and that's one of the reasons we want to make sure to keep you guys informed, like with this meeting and such not.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that. But all right, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Karen, do you have questions or
I'm
comments?
going to limit my comments to just 2. The first one is that there is a tendency, got something in your eye there. There is a tendency to use the math associated with trying to figure out the congestion and the travel time and so on by comparing the no build opportunity to the modified preferred alternative, which of course is not a good basis upon which to do the math at all. And the reason for that is because virtually no one supports the no build alternative. There is something at a higher level than that that would be the proper basis for comparison, in my opinion, and I think the opinion of most people in this county. For example, having a bridge without light rail would be better than a no build alternative as a basis for the math, because what that does is to artificially make the travel times and the congestion look better than they really would be compared to the most likely alternative, which is not no build. So that's one comment. I don't know if you wish to respond to that or not, but I do have another.
No, I appreciate your comment. I recommend providing that to us in the EIS. The one reason we do in this document or in this presentation compare no build to build is because that's requirement of the NEPA Act, is that we're proposing a build alternative and we need to be able to show what are the impacts or benefits based on if we didn't do that build. So I understand your comments aren't about the NEPA process. It's more about a different part of it, but that's why we show that in these documents. Just
And I'm familiar with the NEPA document, and it could be shown, the no build could be shown there as a kind of a PS on the side, but then not the only basis for the comparison, because otherwise people tend to disregard those comparisons because they're just not realistic. My second comment relates to a problem that the many thousands of people who commute for their jobs from Clark County to across the bridge. I could say Portland, but it's more than just Portland. There's going to be a lot of diversion to 205. And that is almost never discussed. And what will be done to deal with that? and the reason for that diversion is because of a couple of things. One, the increased travel time that we see, although I know it's not shown in your percentages there, because of that increased car usage, as you pointed out, from 143,000 to 175,000 over time. And secondly, the impact of those tolls that some of those commuters, pardon me, simply cannot afford. On top of the Oregon taxes that they then have to pay and all the rest of it. So that the impact on 205 is so huge that a lot of people around here are now addressing it as the 205 parking lot. And I think that's something that is ignored in this process. And it really shouldn't be, because it is a huge impact of this building. And that's a problem that we see no resolution except to be talking about a third corridor, which of course is yet another problem that is not being addressed. So that's the end of my comments.
Well, yeah, thank you, Counselor. I will address one part of that, is that our document actually does identify, measure, and disclose the potential projected diversion based on several of the statements you made. You know, we do know that tolling, for example, with some of the freight numbers, if you think that person throughput table that we had, we do see that, you know, maybe during the peak periods, trucks may choose to try to use 205, or you know, maybe we'll come back during the kind of the off-peak times. But we also know, as you were kind of already kind of suggesting, that 205 is a lot more congested and kind of at capacity today than it was even 10 years ago when the previous program was looking at this. And so, yes, that is, you know, diversion, and conversations about diversion are discussed within the document. But the other thing we do see with the adding of the tolls is that maybe some discretionary trips that people may be taking, they're choosing either to not make those, or you know, doing them at a different time, maybe during the off-peak periods. So appreciate your comment, but yeah, it does try to address some of that diversion in our transportation documents within this EIS.
It talks about it, but it doesn't offer solutions. That's the problem.
Does that conclude your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sue?
Yeah, just a couple of, I guess, comments and questions. I'm curious where we're at in the process compared to the CRC.
Good question. So the Columbia River Crossing had completed a record of decision. So that is kind of 2 steps from now from where we're at. We have a draft supplemental environmental impact statement. That's what this is the draft. We will be publishing a final. Our target is to publish that next summer. And then after you publish the final, you work with the federal partners to get that record of decision. The record of decision is really the federal approval that you followed this NEPA process to its entirety, so then you can move into construction. So CRC was really at the ready to go to construction when it didn't get the funding. We have 2 environmental kind of milestones to hit before we will be at the ready to construct milestone.
But we're in better shape in terms of identifying a lot of the funding. So
Yeah, that's good. I should have mentioned that, is that, you know, I think that's ultimately where kind of CRC stalled, is we had the funding to get through the environmental work, and then it was really contingent on, did we get the funding to build it? I think the 2 legislatures, when they came back and were charged with starting this program, said, we need to put that commitment up front, especially with some of the federal programs that were opportunities out there. And so, yes, at this point of that pie chart I showed, about $5.5 billion has been committed. So we are in a different kind of ready for construction state than we were previously.
right. Well, it's good to hear that some of that information from the previous attempt is being utilized, so it's not a total waste. I'm glad to hear that. And it also sounds like you're actively seeking additional funding, so there might be an additional $1 billion out there
Yeah.
ready to pick up, and that could impact tolling or make up for some of the unknowns that would be coming about. I guess the only other thing that I am wondering about is the impact where the project lands on either side of the river. And I know there's mitigation and compensation for property owners, but if there's people are displaced to an affordable housing, there's very limited affordable housing. So I guess I would like to see that addressed at some point.
Yeah. I'm not muted. Thank you. That would be part of that federal relocation Uniform Relocation Act process. I obviously don't have specifics for every single potential impacted person or owner, but that is a part of the, relocation is a part of that process, whether they're the owner or even potentially a tenant. Because I know some of those properties might be people who are leasing or renting, and so that is absolutely a part of the process that we will work through once we get that record of decision and can have those direct conversations.
Thank you for the information.
Any additional questions? I really don't have questions. I have a few comments that I wanted to end with, but I wanted to make sure. Yeah, go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, I just have one really quick question. It should be really fast. And that was, I didn't see that in any of the presentation slides. What do we anticipate the usage of light rail to be?
Good question. It was on the kind of the person throughput slide. Right now, we are anticipating about 30,000 people a day would use transit. The exact split between express bus and light rail, I would maybe refer to the document because I don't want to get it incorrect, but I think it's about if you go back one more maybe, or it's two more, three more keep going. No, up. Oh, sorry, you're going down. It's earlier in the presentation. Sorry about that. The next one up, one more. The person throughput one. There we go. So we kind of have shown all transit on this slide. That currently the existing, which is the express bus, is about 3,800. We do show with no build that more people would potentially be using the buses. But with light rail, some of those people using buses would shift to the light rail. So the 29,000 people includes both the express bus and light rail. And I think it's about 2/3, 1/3 between light rail and bus. So I could get back to you, Councilor Young, with the exact number. I don't want to misquote.
That's okay. This is sufficient. Somehow I missed that little tiny thing right there. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, I'm not hearing any questions. So thank you very much for the presentation. And many of us have sat through this, whether we were on RTC and heard multiple updates over the years and recently. CTRAN, other locations. Thank you for entertaining me in your office just the other day with Greg Johnson for a one-on-one. So I really don't have questions at this point, but I do want to make some comments. So first and foremost, getting to, okay, we're farther along in identifying federal funding. Okay, fine. Got it. If we were to replace just the bridge, if that was the goal, we could do that for less than $1 billion. Take a whole lot of pressure off of tolling. And I understand the need to want to improve the corridor because we've kind of maxed it out with the I-5 bridge. The interchanges, the auxiliary lanes. Got it. So that adds quite a bit, but has good purpose. It is unfriendly to walk across or bicycle across. I mean, I've been on Sydney Harbor. I've crossed their bridge. St. Louis Arch, I've been across that. And I used to live at the foot of the Golden Gate Bridge. So I used to bicycle run and I used to commute by bicycle across the Golden Gate Bridge literally every day. And oh my gosh, the busloads of people that would come because it's iconic. We don't have that because the bridge is so unfriendly to pedestrians and bicycles. And yet the gorge, the Cascades, the view towards Vancouver and Portland will rival any place in the world. So a new bridge will fix all that. But the idea of this, of light rail, there's so much angst over it. In part, it's legitimate because one, people are afraid of it. Two, the sheer cost. You know, we're hearing $1 billion per mile, the most expensive in the world, much less the country. And yet there won't be any interconnectivity. Yeah, we need light rail at some point, but coming from East County, North County, West County, you know, it's a whole project in itself. It's a whole system in itself. And to add billions of dollars to this bridge program, it's a very complicated add. And oh, by the way, you've got $2.5 billion of swag. Yeah, we really don't know until we see what the design is. We really don't know what the unknowns are. This may go up to 7 billion plus. You know, so from my point of view, always I've advocated, yeah, we need to replace a bridge every 100 years or so. And that should happen as a matter of course. But decades of, hey, we need resiliency. We need additional crossings, whether that's light rail and a tunnel, another railroad expansion, using that corridor, maybe bypassing Clark County entirely for some of that 10% of freight mobility. You know, there's a lot of goodness in viewing every aspect of this. But what has happened from the CRC, it was just mentioned, which failed for good reasons. And I think it may have been you, maybe not. Years ago at an RTC meeting, I asked during one of our updates, what did you learn from the CRC failure? And the response I thought was honest and very telling. We learned to talk to people in different ways. It wasn't, oh, we should just stick with replacing the bridge. We should focus on where is the other corridor going to be. And oh, by the way, this is a bridge that's iconic in itself. It's a prime example of what engineers could do with slide rules over 100 years ago. It's a showcase for the industrial age. It's beautiful. It would be a good local bridge. But instead of saying we learned from the people to stick to just replacing the bridge for earthquake resiliency, to eliminate the lift, to improve pedestrian and bicycle, we're adding all bells and whistles. We're going to add every $1 billion add-on we can. So much so that we can't even estimate how many billions more it's going to be. So that was disappointing. Okay, thank you. I was going to ask to go to the how to comment slide. Recently, we had another presentation, and I think it was taken as a bragging point by the presenter. I'm not going to identify the name. We've talked to 100,000 people about this project. I asked, and it was at RTC, I asked at that meeting, well, how many of those 100,000 objected to light rail? I thought the answer again was telling and interesting. I don't know. So I'm going to make two asks. One is to the public. You see this slide, comment with constructive criticism, constructive comments. What do you want to see? What don't you want to see? No, not form letters, just trite sayings, but constructive, substantive comments. Everyone in this Southwest Washington should comment. My second ask is to you. Let's listen. Let's not, this isn't an exercise of, well, we're meeting all of the open comment period. We've talked to 100,000 people and we're going to talk to another 100,000, hopefully. But actually take their comments at substantively to make some changes. Let's go back to just replacing the bridge. Let's separate light rail into a separate project for the future, because it's $1 billion exercise. It's very complicated. Let's get back to what we need to do and eliminate all the bells and whistles, take away some of the pressure on tolling. And oh, by the way, Karen, good question on diversion to 205, but I think there's a simple answer that everyone's ignoring. Oregon's going to toll it. There is nothing that's going to prevent Oregon in the future from tolling 205. They're going to get every farthing from every citizen they can get. So we need resiliency. We need to get back to basics. I would like to see some retraction on these plans. I want to see people comply with the Coast Guard. I don't want to be paying off or limiting businesses upstream. We need to do everything the right way. And quite frankly, I just feel like we're absolutely just rechristening the failed CRC. One last comment, because it's coming up. Push to shove. As part of your narrative, hey, we just need to talk to people in a different way. We came up with the locally preferred option, and all of these entities signed on to it. They all had caveats. Another way of saying that is they all had disagreements or concerns. So the push comes to shove. We're going to see it with C-Tran. Light rail. Clark County doesn't want to pay for it. We don't want to pay for operation and maintenance. We don't want to have a Portland taxing district up here in Clark County. That was one of the caveats. And is C-Tran going to pay the price? Where's the connectivity? What is Clark County? What is Southwest Washington taxpayers going to have to pay for adding this couple of miles of light rail north? That was a caveat. It was a disagreement. And now we're coming to the point in time when you're going to have to say, okay, we understand. We're going to do something different. So anyway, those are my comments. I look forward to all those billions being translated into local jobs. That's always a good narrative and a real point. And I look forward to your concluding comments.
Well, I appreciate the push to get people to comment on the program. I think that's the message we want to really get out there. I do think that, as you mentioned, the partners who helped us identify the alternative did have conditions. A lot of those conditions were, as you get a little bit further down design, they weren't necessarily kind of the high level, what is the alternative, but it's, as you're designing this, think, consider that. And so we still have to address a lot of those conditions. And, I do appreciate the questions and the comments that the council asked today. I think that hopefully will encourage people to go and make comments to our environmental impact statement. As far as getting those comments, there's a lot of regional partners that will need to take those into account to be able to address what the final decisions for this program are. And so, yeah, I appreciate you encouraging people to comment, because that's really why we're trying to get out there right now is we need those comments. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to come. I know if the program, if the council ever wants the program to come and provide updates, we're absolutely willing to do that and would look forward to any future conversations. But appreciate the time today.
Well, we very much appreciate yours and the opportunity to once again highlight the complexity of what you're doing to the public. Thank you and it's been an hour plus. We have the fall supplemental work session next. So we'll go ahead and conclude this. Thanks again for coming in person. Appreciate it.